second. So we do not forget. That would be terrible. Yeah. And one more smidgen of lip gloss. And then we'll open up the waiting room.
Let it rip.
Here we go. Here we go. There we go. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. We are thrilled. Of course, we're going to welcome all our AI bots. They just follow us around. And we're delighted to get to see you today. We'll kick off in just about 30 seconds here and get right into some of the most exciting content I have heard in a long time. Okay, my buddy Katrina Clear is here, and her session yesterday knocked my socks off. Now, but here we go again with more incredible content. So we're delighted to see you all today. Now, I'll very quickly just say a quick hello. Now I'm going to pass to my partner, Jen McCuen. I'm delighted to see you. Take it away, my friend.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, Chiefs. Are you ready to go? Let's go. All right. We just get organized. Okay. So I'd love to get your input to get started. And I'd love your reaction to and your answer to this question on the screen. And if you're not, some of you may not be in the Zoom, you may be dialing in only. So I will capture what's here. What percentage of presentations are stimulating? And put your guess, your belief in the chat, just a number. And there's a reminder on the screen about the definition of stimulating. Stimulating means something is happening as a result of your presentation. Either interest is occurring, some activity is resulting. And let's see what you think. This will just help set the table for our conversation today.
We have a delightful range all the way from, I think, at a high on like 70% down to a perhaps cynical 15%, perhaps, but we've all been there, 10%, 18%. I love the precision, Karen. That's fabulous. Alexis, 10%. Great
There's probably some statistical modeling going on with some people.
We have some smart women in this room.
Arrive at their percentages. Well, I'm going to share with you the answer. Now, a lot of research has been done about this, but from the source that I pulled from, I think all of you who responded will be surprised to see that the answer is 3%. So this tells me a couple of things. One, the bar is very low. And moreover, there is a huge opportunity here for us to capture a place in the 3% and stay in the 3%. And we may be misjudging our own ability to be stimulating through our presentations. So I hope our time here is well spent to illuminate why so few presentations are stimulating. Here's what I know. In order to capture a place in the 3%, your audience needs to be able to understand, remember, and retell your message. It is as simple as that. And to do that, you're going to need to stop doing some things and start doing some others if you really want to be stimulating. And again, stimulating is about creating something, creating interest, creating action. And that is why we are here today. We are here to ensure that you can capture a spot in that 3% all the time. Not some of the time, not a little bit of the time, but all of the time. And you know that you're in that 3%. So here's our game plan for today. And I do have some very specific strategies to help make your message sticky. Sticky messages stimulate things. But before we can get into that, we've got to talk a little bit about you and a little bit about your audience. And so once we do that, that'll set the table really nicely for these sticky strategies that I have, very practical, applicable things for your presentation. My encouragement is for you to use a presentation, a lens today for a presentation that you either have coming up or that maybe you just did recently that you want to armchair quarterback a bit. Either one is fine, but either way, I would suggest that you use something that is relevant to you and that you can turn around and immediately use for our work today. This is probably a good place for me and for Julie to introduce ourselves, and I'm actually going to take my slides down for just a second. I am Jen McCuen. I'm going to go first, and then I'll pass things over to Julie. I am Jen. I have spent most of my career working with senior leaders, executive leaders, sales leaders, and sales teams on how to create and deliver a message that sticks. A message that changes things, creates action, stimulates interest. And doing sessions like this for me really underpin my mission, which is to help leaders and teams do better, help leaders and teams prepare to do things they've never done before, to prepare for experiences that they've never had before. I spent most of my career in seats like yours. I worked in corporate America for 30 years and really big companies, a Fortune 5 company, and also some smaller regional companies. But earlier this year, I decided to make my own seat and open my own company, FutureEdge Advisors. And this is the work that I'm doing to serve folks like you. The other thing that you should know about me is that I'm a former chief. I had some employment disruption earlier this year, so I was not able to renew my membership, but I still stay very connected to my chief network. And that's where Julie comes in. That's how Julie and I got connected. And we really owe her our thanks today for being here. Julie is the one who inspired this session. And so I'm going to yield the floor to her so she can introduce herself to all of you.
So when I first met Jen, it was through a mutual connection. She said, "Oh, you guys would have a lot in common." And I did the call with Jen, and I felt like the world kind of shook for me because a lot of my work at Persona Media, my marketing, my thought leadership marketing agency, and in this new community I've started, it's all about teaching. It's teaching tactics. And she basically told me that everything I was doing was wrong. And I was terrified. Rachel knows. Rachel has heard me teach a number of times now, and Rachel will probably be thrilled to see the improvements that come from what Jen is already teaching us today. And so anyway, I'm delighted to have you all here.
I've been having fun, so I'm sure it's even more fun.
Yeah. Totally not as bad as I feel like it is, but thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to go back in to our visual age just to stay grounded. So just one more piece of business before we get into things, and that is just some encouragements for our work here for the next 55-ish minutes. First, I will encourage you to stay curious. I will challenge the status quo on a few things that we have seen with presentation design. And so you will decide when you leave here today what you change, if anything, but just for the time that we're here together, just be willing to stay curious about the conversation and be willing to test drive some new things. And I will encourage you to test drive them after the session as well to see if they work. Experimentation is really the best way to start changing things so that you can capture a spot in that 3%. And then finally, I'm going to encourage your participation. I'm confident that some of you are already doing some of the things, maybe all of the things that I subscribe to here. I'd love to hear how it's working for you, your testimonial. And also we'll encourage your questions and comments as we go. We've got a lot of people here today, so you can share real time in the chat. Julie is going to be keeping an eye on the chat. She'll pause me, slow things down if we need to bring forward any questions or any comments. Would love to hear from you out loud if you want. Again, because we're a pretty big group, I'm going to encourage that you raise your hand in Zoom if you'd like to talk. I can't see all of you, given the way the screen is set up for me as a presenter. So if you want to ask something or share something, just raise your hand, and then I'll pause when it makes sense, and we'll bring you on. And also, I know a lot of you aren't on camera. It's okay for today. Be how you want to be. Create the best learning space for you today and the work that we're going to do. But because I'm not sure whether or not all of you can see the Zoom, I may be summarizing some of the words on the screen just to make sure we don't leave anybody behind. Is that okay with everybody?
Definitely, definitely. Jen, we did just have a great comment in the chat that Bonnie is like watching the effectiveness kind of in action right now, because she's exactly right. We're trying to do everything that we're going to walk you through just from the get-go, from the moment we started. Now, we didn't do the music that I forgot to do. So that might be a thing that we do next time, and would add that to the notes. But anyway, back to you, Jen.
Yeah, I'm going to have to walk the walk today. So just talk the talk. So you're going to have to keep me honest. So look, one more thing before we get underway, and I would love to know what brought you here today. And so as you think about this, and I will encourage you to share in the chat, I'd like you to condense what brought you here, what you were hoping to get out of today in 6 words or less. So the challenge is on. Make sure when you're chatting that you chat to everyone, not just to me or to Julie, so that everyone can see what brought you here. All right, it looks like some folks, we've got a number of folks that have some upcoming presentations that they want to be sharp for, they want to be effective for. You want to be stimulating, you want something to happen as a result of your presentation. Otherwise, why are you there? If ideas aren't happening, if decisions aren't being made, if actions aren't being taken, why are you there? I'm just scrolling through. So far, I don't see anything that's going to be out of bounds today based on our game plan.
Love the piece Elena brought up about motivating her team. I think like
Yeah,
that could happen much more deeply than we do currently in presentations.
so much of presentations are about how we see them being done, and then we repeat, and that may be why so few presentations are stimulating, because we are repeating what we see around us. And so, okay, good. I know the ideas are going to keep coming, but so far so good. And I'm going to proceed with the game plan, but that doesn't mean that we can't take a detour or a slight left turn if something pops for you that you want to talk about. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. Before we can get into tips and tricks and sticky strategies, we've got to talk about the biggest obstacle to creating a stimulating presentation. And that is, unfortunately, you. You are the biggest obstacle to your presentations being stimulating. And that is because of something called the curse of knowledge. Has anybody heard of the curse of knowledge? Are you familiar with the curse? And if you are, you can either raise your hand if you want to share what it is, or you can share in the chat. And if you don't know what it is, then do a quick Google. Looks like Grace is familiar. Anybody want to share? Those of you someone who knows the curse of knowledge, somebody want to sum it up for us? You come off of mute or put it in the chat if you want. Cognitive bias. Yeah, okay, here it comes. Oh yes, Wikipedia. Yeah, the curse of knowledge, once you know something, it is impossible to remember what it's like not to know it. And because of that, relative to your presentation design, it becomes really, really challenging to adopt the mindset of your audience. And that's why a lot of our messages don't stick. That's why a lot of our presentations are not stimulating, because we have jumped ahead of where our audience actually is, and we leave them far, far behind. If your success is directly proportional to your audience's ability to understand, remember, and retell your message, then everything you do as a presenter, which starts with your design, has to be about overcoming the curse of knowledge. So when we talk about our sticky strategies here in a minute, every single thing we talk about is going to directly combat the curse of knowledge, but just know that the curse is strong. It is strong. So you've got to really be aware of it. And then you've got to work some very specific strategies to overcome it. Okay, so that's you. You are the number one obstacle to a stimulating presentation. The second biggest obstacle to a stimulating presentation is your audience. Sadly, your audience does not come to you an open book, ready to soak up everything you have to say like a sponge. I know we think they are, but that is because we are cursed. Our audience, in fact, is kind of a mess when they come to us, right? Look here. I mean, this is you. This is what I thought about when you wanted to be here. No one forced you to be here today. But even wanting to be here, I know that you have 97 things pulling on you right now. And because of that, your attention span is very limited. Your brain goes and takes vacations, little breaks every 6 seconds. You have less attention span than a goldfish. I know everybody's got a full plate and then some. We also now today in 2023 are unbelievably impatient. We want what we want, when we want it, how we want it. Like, we live in an on-demand self-service world. And so when you come into a presentation where the speaker's sort of doling things out to you the way they want to, that can create a lot of anxiety in your audience. As a result, audiences end up doing a lot of filtering and scanning for what matters to them because of this very last thing on the list. And everything before this can be summed up in this last piece, which is we don't pre-learn. Adults are not fourth graders. We don't come to you soaking up every single thing you have, waiting to use it someday. Adults only learn what they can use right away. Has to be immediately useful, has to be relevant. And if it's not, it is discarded. And that is the second biggest reason why your presentations may not be as stimulating as you think they are, because there's too much, and there's too much for your audience to have to figure out what to use and what is relevant to them. And so they end up discarding all of it. So when we think about presentation design, we've got to overcome the curse of knowledge, and we've got to account for all of these barriers that our audience presents to us. So the strategies that we're going to talk about next are all meant to overcome both things, you and them. And here is the first one. How many of you, and you don't have to answer this, we can consider this a rhetorical question, but if you want to be brave and raise your hand, how many of you start your presentation design by starting with your slides first? I see Rachel's like, oh, I don't know. A lot of people start by designing their slides first, and I'm going to submit that that is one of the actions that catches you in the curse of knowledge. And where you really should be starting first is your message. What is it that you're trying to do? And the tactic here with your core message is simplicity. Most people shy away from being simple because they think simple is dumbed down. But that is not true. Simple is decluttered. Now, cluttering is something we do when we're cursed. A curse of knowledge is a direct byproduct of expertise. The more you know, the more you want to tell. But the more you tell is not more what your audience knows. So the first thing you have to do is get really simple with your message. What is your message? What is the one thing that you want your audience to think, feel, or do differently as a result of your presentation? There's a great analogy I came across that exemplifies the power of a simple core message, and it comes from the Army. And the Army does a lot of planning for battle. Lots of battle plans. But the Army also admits that very few, if any, of those plans actually see the battlefield. And that is because they have an adage that goes, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Now, the Army says that doesn't mean you shouldn't plan. Planning is good. It forces you to think through the things you need to think through. But all of the unpredictability of environmental factors plus the enemy itself means that a lot of the plans don't ever actually get seen to fruition. So in the Army, they have something called commander's intent. And commander's intent is the goal of the plan. So the goal of the plan may be take the hill. It is that simple. That is what has to happen no matter what. And so there may be a very elaborate plan to take the hill, but once the troops hit the field, if something happens that diverts the plan from being executed the way they thought it through, the troops aren't paralyzed. They don't need a play-by-play guidebook on the field of what to do. Instead, they just know no matter what, they have to take the hill, and they can pivot in the moment. So we need to have our own commander's intent for presentations. What is our take the hill? Because I know if you've presented before, you've run into things like you thought you had an hour, but then you got started 15 minutes late because the person before you went over. So now your hour presentation gets chopped down to 45 minutes or 30 minutes. What happened? We've seen that happen to people. What do people normally do to compensate for that?
They talk really fast through their slides because they're slave to their slides. And as such, if I might share, there is a very funny anecdote for a couple of seconds that we learned in the MBA school, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Can I share it?
Yes, yeah, please do. I'd love to hear.
So I went to school in Paris for my MBA. And we were having this mergers and acquisitions simulation. So we all prepared the slides. We're totally into it. And we come in front of the simulation board, and they throw us a whole bunch of, no, stop this. What we want to know is this. And you can see, because we were all international, there's such funny ways of cultures, and especially French for particular, about, I am going through my slides. I am going through my slides. You're going to listen to the slides right now. It was just, it was start, and then after that I had 20 years of my career, and I have seen people constantly trying to go back to the slides, even for us who are like executives, and I almost have never been in front of the executives where I could have actually went through my slides. It will always be like a totally different question, so you have to be ready for it.
Yeah.
And the slides, go to whatever you want, like just I teach my team always never be slave to your slides. And if that's the question, answer that question. If you have a slide that you can show your visual, wonderful. Never try to follow it the way how you think in your head, because you're going to lose those executives.
Yeah, Sandra, you're right on point. And the reason that we see that we become, or we see people become slave to their slides, is because they don't know what their core message is. And so all they can do is follow the step-by-step plan. And then when they get stuck, they get trapped. And so they just hurry up and speed up. So the way to get simple is through ruthless redux, which is really hard because it is the opposite of what your brain wants to do when it's cursed. When your brain is cursed, it wants to do everything. And if you want to be simple, you got to leave some little darlings behind on the cutting room floor. And Julie knows that I went through this same ruthless redux just with what we were going to do here today. I went through several iterations of design, cutting every time to get simple, what absolutely has to happen no matter what. Simple is sticky. Simple can be understood, remembered, and retold. And that stimulates things. So my question for you is, thinking about the presentation, either the one you have coming up, and a lot of you have some high stakes presentations coming up, or maybe one that you've done recently that you want to look at in the rearview mirror. Did you have a core message? Do you have a core message? What is the one thing that has to happen? The one thing that you want your audience to think, feel, or do differently?
So
And
Jen, oh,
yeah.
please.
No. I was going to say, this is to think on, and then I'd love any reflections or comments.
So, a question that comes up for me for this is, like, how concrete? Like, does it have to be in a single statement? Does it need to, like, what would a good example of one look like? Like,
well, and by the way, you don't have to share your take the hill. It can become part of your presentation if it's really compelling. Sometimes that becomes why you're there and what you want the audience to know why they're there. For me today, it was about getting you into the 3%. And so in asking all of you, what did you come here for? I didn't know what was going to come out. And if a bunch of things came out that wasn't necessarily going to play to my structure, I was ready to pivot. I told Julie, I'm like, we're just going to go there. We're going to go where people want to go, because the take the hill for this presentation, no matter what, is people need to get what they need to get into and stay in the 3%. Bottom line. And I'll be able to pivot as a result of that.
So
Erin, what are you thinking?
Yeah, one of the things that I think about a lot, especially as things come to the forefront, and people in business understand a lot more about like neurodivergence and different learning styles. You know, when doing a presentation, everybody receives and processes information differently. Some people are writers, some people are talkers, some people like to read. So how do you make it simple in a way that can land with so many different learning styles in your audience?
Well, Erin, that means you can't just do things one way. And we're going to talk in a little bit about your slide design, which can really help, I think, address some of the things that you brought up. And so maybe we can hold the full answer to that question for just a bit. Would that be okay?
That was a really great way to say we're about to talk about that later in your presentation. So thank you for that.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because we do live and we recognize that we live in a diverse world now. And so that means that we can't just do things one way. Any other thoughts or questions around your core message?
And Jen, this might be for later, or maybe not for this meeting. Maybe more for Katrina's meeting yesterday on marketing. But I noticed one thing I struggle in marketing with a lot is, like, half the team thinks we decided to take the hill 2 meetings ago. And now we're in a meeting on how to take the hill. And someone very senior is questioning, why are we taking the hill? And you know, this could be happening in the very front end of the meeting, and you've done all the distilling, you've done your homework, your deck is somewhat entertaining, and you think you checked all the boxes. And so I don't know, that might not be for this meeting, but I was like, that when I look at I'm trying to answer your question right now. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, this is what's derailing the meetings that are getting derailed.
Yeah. Well, first, Rachel, you bring up a good point that the things that we're talking about here today and that we'll continue to talk about apply to meetings as well as they do formal presentations. And so, yeah, that's kind of a layered issue. There could be a lot of different reasons for that may not have anything to do with your presentation design. It may be around how decisions are being made in your organization.
Right.
Your agreements around.
I guess I was just wondering if it kind of gets you into this curse of knowledge where it was like, oh, we need into enough detail before.
Yeah, it's something to pay attention to and then debrief after a meeting if you got kind of wrapped around the axle on something like that. Like, did we really make a decision 2 meetings ago?
Yeah.
Was everybody really aligned about this? And do we have to go back and do some due diligence before we can keep moving forward?
Can I add on question to that? So would it maybe be wise to kick off with, hey, 2 meetings ago, we were here and what we discussed was blank. And so we're going to now build on that today. And if we can, like, I think what you did at the front end of this meeting, Jen, you had an agenda, you had roles, you had specifics that we needed to do. And
I think reminding people of the decisions that have been made sometimes needs to happen because you go back to that list of your audience, right? We're short on time, we're overwhelmed. Like, people may literally have forgotten that a decision about that has been made. And that's a great point.
Yeah, I think that I really like what Julie said, which was, let's build on it. So you validate that people had a different expectation and you're not saying like, no, we didn't.
Yeah,
But
yeah, right. You don't get
just kind of like totally true, but let's just add some additional richness to what we have decided.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
that's good.
That's a great way of not saying.
I'm coming off of a meeting right now where we are tracing back a lot of problems in, like, process problems in our business. And it all comes back to level setting expectations and really building expectations in. And I think that's one thing I really learned from listening to you, Jen, is how important that is.
Yeah.
So
good point. Okay. All right. I'm gonna push us on in the interest of time, but we can circle back to some of these topics as we go because this all builds on one another. So look, before we move on to our next sticky strategy, first sticky strategy is simplicity. Simple is not dumbed down. Simple is decluttered. What is your take the hill? The thing that has to happen. Before we move on to the next strategy, pop quiz. Grab a piece of paper and something to write with real quick and just number 1 through 5 on your paper. And I want you to write down the first thing that comes to mind. Don't overthink this. I'm going to move really fast. Ready? Number 1, name a color. Number 2, name a piece of furniture. Number 3, name a flower. Number 4, pick a number between 1 and 4. Number 5, name an animal in the zoo. Pencils down. All right, let's see how you did on the quiz. How many of you had red for the color? Just raise your hand in the Zoom. I can't see all, I won't be able to see all of it. Okay, we had some reds. Okay, interesting. How many of you had share? Let's clear the hands. Clear your hands. Whoops, I'm moving too fast. Let's go back. How many of you had share? Okay, take your hands down. How many of you had rose for your flower? Quick raise of hands. What are the chances? Hands down. How many of you had 3 for your number? Oh, yeah. Oh, look at all the 3s. And then how many of you had lion for your animal? Oh, isn't that funny? So this quiz, you can take your hands down. Thank you for playing along. This quiz was meant to demonstrate our inherent sense of predictability in our nature. And that is a challenge for you as a presenter. The same old, same old, the same old, same old, the same old, same old. The norm is strong. And I will tell you that your ability to create and seed a message that sticks in your audience is dramatically lowered if you are doing the same old, because we tune out. And so your audience's ability to understand, remember, and retell your message is in direct proportion to you being unexpected. And that is the next strategy for sticky messages, is being unexpected. Now, there are two pieces to being unexpected. First, you've got to get your audience's attention, and then you've got to keep it. We're going to talk about getting attention first. And getting attention is all about violating the expectations that people have when they come into a presentation. How do most presentations start? What is the first thing that most presenters do at the beginning of a presentation?
Bore me to death.
It's a very tactical thing I'm looking for.
So do you think it's like what is the norm, or what
is the norm? What is the norm? How do most presentations start? This is not a trick question. How do most presentations start?
Most of what I have seen is, here is what we're going to tell you. So going through the agenda.
Okay. I think a lot of presentations start with a presenter introducing themselves.
Okay, yeah, if it's
yeah, see, look, it's so normal, we don't even realize that it's happening. You know why? Because you're not paying attention. Because you have tuned out. Because you know that's how the presentation is going to start. It's why most people don't come to meetings on time, and they don't show up to presentations on time, because they know that first piece is boring and has nothing to do with them. So the first thing I'm going to suggest that you stop doing is what your audience expects you to do at the beginning of a presentation, which is introduce yourself. Now, why do presenters start with introducing themselves? Let's just get underneath it. We can't change what we don't acknowledge. Why do we do it? And Julie, help me with the chat, if people are answering this in the chat.
Well, like you taught me, you have to give people a second to think about it and not just immediately look for responses. So we're letting you think for a second and letting there be a pause.
Yeah.
And then, so Marilyn points out, they want to establish credibility.
Okay.
And AGN, I don't know what your name is, but those are some cool initials. Also credibility, which is interesting, because why would we need that if there's LinkedIn, if there's some knowledge about who you are? But I think it's just because we didn't know we could do differently, that we should aim for a little bit of surprise and delight and stuff.
It's also because it's what everybody does.
Yeah.
So, again, the pull of normal is really strong. So
Sandra had her hand up.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Sandra.
No, totally fine. I'm not disagreeing, and what Julie said is exactly establishing the credibility. But if I just look, even this is how we started. You presented yourself, and Julie presented herself. So is that really that wrong? I mean, I do want to hear about the credibility of who I'm going to spend 1 hour with. So I'm just wondering, is that
100%? The audience needs to know why you're there, but that's not what Julie and I did first, just to be fair. So for the first thing that you do, I'd like to encourage you to be audience-centric, not you-centric. There is a time and a place for you to introduce yourself. And if you want to be unexpected and create fertile ground for your message to stick, I'm going to suggest that there's a different place for introductions. Now, in order to get that ground fertile for a sticky message, you've got to violate expectations. And so my encouragement is to start your presentation with a jolt. Jolts are very, very quick activities that get attention. What did I do today to jolt you? Yeah, the 3%, right? What percentage of presentations are stimulating, tapped into what you were thinking? You can do, I used to use another startling statistics. Here's another example. I used to work in the healthcare business, and I opened a presentation once by telling people that 2.5 million people die in our country every year. 98,000 of them due to preventable medical errors. I know that 98,000 can be hard to feel. So what if I told you that that number was equal to a jetliner crashing every single day for a year? That's 98,000. That is unacceptable. How is it that we allow preventable medical errors from killing so many people in our country every year? And then I went into the next part of my presentation. So you can do what I call startling statistics that jolt your audience, that get their attention. I'm going to skip this one. It'll be in the handout in the interest of time, but you can tell a story to start your presentation. Just make sure that it's short and make sure that you are telling it, not reading it. So you got to memorize it, and then you got to practice it, and you got to deliver it like it just occurred to you. So stories are great. You can do quick activity. No matter what you do, it needs to be brief. If it goes on for too long, you're going to lose your audience, and the whole purpose of jolting is to get attention. The other most important thing about a jolt is it's got to connect to your presentation. So you can't do something random like tell a joke. And I would encourage you never to tell a joke as a jolt. But you've got to do something that connects to your presentation. So my 3% number, like what percentage of presentations are stimulating? And that created the runway for opening the presentation. And folks, one easy way for you to be unexpected is to open your presentations differently than the way they always open. So avoiding introducing yourself, but instead using a formula that is audience-centric. Starts with a jolt. The jolt gets you into why we're here. Outcomes. My outcome. So you can be in the 3% all the time, every time. Get in, stay in. Make sure your messages stick. That was my outcome for today's session. This is what your audience cares about. They care about the what's in it for them far more than they care about who you are right off of the bat. They want to know what the value is for listening. They also want to know how their time is going to be spent. So you got to come in really fast behind it with your agenda. I say the game plan. Here's how we're going to use our time to get to that outcome. And I subscribe to the power of threes. There is something magical about doing things in threes. We are primed for threes from when we are children. ABCs, 1, 2, 3, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, 3 blind mice. We love things in threes. So my agenda is always in threes. Always, always, always. 3 things, easy to track. We're going to start with you. We're going to talk about your audience. And then we're going to talk about some strategies to make your message stick. Boom, 3 things. Easy to track for you, easy to track for them. Then you can introduce yourself. But this isn't a resume. Please don't bore people with your life history. I'm sure it's wildly exciting, but not for your presentation. This is a credibility piece. If you want your message to stimulate something, to create action and interest, really what you're doing is you want to influence people, and your influence is built through your credibility. And so why are you uniquely positioned to be there? And what can the audience expect from you? And
Well,
then
before I wonder
Yeah.
if Jen, this would be a good point to jump in because you actually encouraged that for this conversation, which to me is wild that you would want people to jump in with questions. But on this piece, especially about credibility, Melinda had a question in the chat about how does this apply to making a presentation to a board rather than an audience at a meeting or conference?
I don't know, Melinda, that there's any difference at all. Giving a presentation starts with design, and design starts with your audience. What does your audience need? Why are they there? What are they looking for? If you don't start with what's your core message based on your audience, then I remember somebody told me once, it's like writing a love letter to whom it may concern. And so if you're just lifting presentations off the shelf and giving them, we know that's why only 3% of presentations are stimulating. So you've got to make sure that your design is in line with what your audience needs. And so I don't know that a board is any different than any other audience that you would deliver to in terms of how to plan for it and how to tailor your message. And I'm happy to stay on after the jolt piece. You gotta think about, but look, board members are wired the same way as every other human being, and I know that sometimes that doesn't seem like that, but they really are. And so they need to be brought into the meeting just like everybody else, but you are going to need, I think, to be thoughtful about what's going to play with a board and not diminish your credibility. Okay, look, the last piece of ORS is, and that's the shorthand I use for the opening structure, is rules. I used agreements when I set this up, so you don't have to use the word rules, but you are essentially creating rules for your audience. If you don't tell your audience how to behave, then they will behave the way they think they should behave, and that may not work for you. So it could be something just as simple as telling them when to ask questions. Like you can ask questions as we go, feel free to raise your hand, jump in, or I'd prefer if you hold your questions to the end. We'll allot plenty of time to take Q&A at the end of the presentation. So a rule can be as simple as that. But always be thoughtful about whether or not there are certain things that you want from your audience or that you want to encourage from your audience. This outline for opening, we don't see it very much because it is in contrast to our cursive knowledge. We know all of this as a presenter. We know what the outcomes are. We know what the agenda is. We know what our role is. We know what we want from people, but very rarely do we ever communicate that to the audience. So when I'm designing and planning for a presentation, and again, I go back to the Army, no plan survives contact with the enemy. I know that the only part of my presentation that I can control is my opening. And so I do this religiously. I map out my opening, my jolt, and then my ORS. And then I plan the rest of my presentation for sure. But after I finish with my rules, I know it's fair game for what's going to happen. And I've got to be willing to go with it. And I got to know what my take the hill is. But this is very structured. How is this different from how you would normally open your presentation? Sandra, I know you've got your hand up.
Yeah, so I would say this is great. And I would say it's probably very similar to what you have, what this OARR is, I think, how I do it generally. So thank you for sharing it. One interesting problem that I have is, so number one, which is what exactly happened to me, I was late, which is, I think, happened a lot with my audience, especially with the executives. They're always like late from another meeting. So I think, so maybe question for you and Julie, what do you happen with your audience starting late, right? Coming late in when you're already. Number two is second question is that how do you capture the attention for the audience that you don't see? Right now, you see me, but you didn't like 10 minutes ago. And so I don't know, as I'm talking, like, are they just, doing the laundry on the back, or they're just texting somebody else, or so how do you control not being able to see your audience, almost like broadcasting it to them?
Sure. I'm going to answer your first question, or your last question first. And that is, as a presenter, I assume positive intent. So just because your camera's down, I don't assume that you're off doing other things. My assumption is you came here because you needed something. And so I'm here to serve that. And whether I can put eyeballs on you or not, that is my assumption. But we're going to get to how do I really make sure about that in our next piece. So hang on there. And about starting late, Sandra, look, I'm kind of a purist when it comes to starting on time and ending on time. And if people come late, they will catch up. Adults are smart. They can fill in the blanks. They may put something in the chat if they're completely lost. But when we go back and recover everything for someone who comes late, you are teaching people it is okay to come late. And it also is very dismissive of the people who did show up on time. So I know that's a very general response to that question. I know there are a lot of nuances to that, but that's my general belief about starting on time, ending on time. Angela, I'm going to go to you, and then we're going to keep it moving.
Awesome. I love for the outcomes part to start off with saying, okay, we're going to talk about what success looks like in this meeting. And I'm going to propose what I prepared for what success looks like. And I want you to tell me if this is what success looks like for you. And if I allow someone in the audience to affirm that. And I find when I do that, the audience is immediately engaged at that phase.
Yeah.
And everyone knows that I always start my meetings on time. And so I have that reputation. So when I'm holding a meeting, because they know this is a strategy, if they want to have a voice in what success of the meeting looks like, they have to be on time in order to participate in that.
Yeah, right on.
Awesome.
I love that. And my version of that was to invite you all in about what you wanted by asking that question, what brought you here, versus asking about it at outcomes. That was my decision because I didn't want the flow of oars to be interrupted. But there are times certainly where I'm okay with inviting people in at the O and then rolling through. I mean, you may not have to introduce yourself every time if it's a standing meeting, right? So the judgment around using the OARR is up to you, but I just want you always to think it through. And someone has asked me privately if we're going to be finishing on time, and I assure you that we are. Okay, I'm going to push us on. So if being unexpected first is about getting attention, then what I don't want you to forget is that you've got to keep attention. And keeping attention is something that presenters are really terrible at doing because we're cursed. And so the one thing I want you to remember is that adults don't learn unless they're curious. We have to be in a curious state to take in new information and do something with it. And so your job as a presenter, and I know you're very good at closing gaps in knowledge, but what we all have to be better at is opening gaps in curiosity. And so thinking about times in your presentation where it is important to open a gap in curiosity so you can close it with information. I did that in this presentation. I had a formal piece that actually opened a gap. What was that?
Goldfish, remember, Jen, we're goldfish.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so instead of rolling right into the strategy around unexpected, we did the pop quiz, right? That opened a gap. Hey, we have this inherent tendency to expect things to be the same as they've always been. So how do we break that? So you can get you can keep getting attention by asking questions, pausing, inviting the group in. Asking a question is a really powerful way to get your audience re-engaged with you. And then you can fill the gap. Okay. So as you are thinking about your own message, my challenge to you when you leave, and especially for those of you who have a presentation coming up, what is it that your audience expects you to do? And now, how will you break that expectation? Because those are the moments when you can create unexpectedness, and that will create fertile ground for your message to stick. Okay. The last little piece we're going to do is on slide design, because most slides are not simple. And because of that, they can be a huge detractor to your message. So when you have simple slide design, that alone can be hugely unexpected. But again, most slide design is far from simple. I know you can't read this. How many times have you heard that in a presentation? How many times have you said that in a presentation? That phrase is a curse of knowledge, and it's also a presentation killer. And it happens because normally because you're trying to show a lot of data on the slide. And Sandra, I'm just going to hold for just a second on your question, okay? And I'll come back to you in just a second. And so the one way to overcome the I know you can't read this is to stop showing raw data in your presentation. What you should be showing in your presentation is the story that your data has to tell, the so what of your data. The other reason why the I know you can't read this happens is because we tend to put lots of words on slides. And it's hard because when you have a lot on your slide, it really forces your audience to read what's on your slide. And unfortunately, humans can't read and listen at the same time. And if given the choice, they will read, which means they're not listening to you, which then really sort of begs the question, why are you there? And know that you just read this entire slide and finished this entire thought before I even got through reading the first sentence. That is what happens for you when your slides are text heavy. So my suggestion is to stop using your slides as your talking points, get your talking points down in the notes section of your slide, and start applying the billboard test to your slides. Slides that can be read in less than 3 seconds, essentially the amount of time you have when you're flying by a billboard at 65 miles an hour. That's the best slide design that you can have. If you are going to put words on a slide, the general rule of thumb is no more than 6. And I know that I violated that. When I have more than 6 words, I use animation to manage the flow of information onto the slide. And make sure that your point is way bigger than you think it should be. I subscribe to nothing less than 22 point.
Yep.
So start telling the so what about your data and start using more pictures and far fewer words, because sticky messages are remembered pictorially, not by words. If you want your message to stick, pictures are more effective than that. And your slides are a visual aid. They are not your message. They should support your message.
Wow.
So
with 2 minutes left, like that
I'm
was
going to stop the
epic.
share here.
So we have Sandra's question, and then we also have Bonnie had a question in the chat too. Sandra, why don't you go ahead and then we'll read Bonnie's question, if that's okay.
Sure. I think that Jen pretty much covered it. What I do, and I was wondering if this is a good idea. I even rewrote marketing slides because they said if you have more than 5 bullet points, nobody's going to remember them. So if you're such a slave, and tell me this is a good idea, why don't you writing the slide and then make the visuals and then select just the key points and put them on the visual and then voice out what you want to say.
That's a great idea. And in fact, I did something similar for today's session. So I'm not, and it's funny, I don't know if anybody asked me in the chat for my slides. You probably didn't, because my slides don't have a lot on them. They're not super helpful. But what I will offer today is handouts. So I took my slides and I fully annotated them in the notes section of each slide. And that's what we'll send you after this session. So you'll get everything we covered. You get a few bonus things that we didn't get a chance to get to today. And I am happy to stay on for a bit. I know Julie has a hard stop and is going to need to fly, and some of you may need to fly as well, but I'm happy to stay on. What I'd like to just say in closing is, if you really want to up your game and get in that 3% more often than not, I want you to critically evaluate this presentation that you've got coming up. And what's one thing you're going to stop doing and one thing you're going to start doing. You can't do more than that out of the gates. So pick your thing that's going to have the biggest impact, create the most influence over your message. So that you stimulate activity as a result of your presentation.
Amazing, Jen. Thank you.
Yeah, that time flew.
Yeah. Jen will have her contact info in the deck that we send out. She has been exceptional to work with for me, and I hope that she would do the same for you. Thank you all so much for being here, Jen. You did say you would stick around for a few if you had any other questions. But otherwise, thank you, Chiefs, for being so wonderfully engaged on a session like this. It's lovely learning with you. So back to you, Jen, and thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Julie. Hey, Julie, will you stop the recording before you pop out?
I shall. Thank you.